dress code first.
Yeah.
Morning, everyone. The live stream will be beginning shortly.
Good to go. Good morning, everybody. We did say we were going to get underway at 9:30. Just some more housekeeping. Given the circumstances and the heat outside and whatnot, the usual dress code, I think we can sort of relax it and at least keep our jackets off, and maybe we can, depending on the temperature, we can loosen ties or eliminate them. And I accordingly be as relaxed as we can. Okay, is it Mr. Kusner or Mr. Tahar?
It'll be Mr. Tahar who will be continuing with sorry. Mr. Chair, it will be Mr. Kahar who will be continuing with Ms. Anderson's overview evidence this morning. But before we get to that, we did have two small housekeeping matters we just wanted to deal with first, with your permission. Okay. The first is, you recall that yesterday there was an issue with respect to the document tab 46 of joint document book. And to refresh your memory, that was the extracts from the May 14th City Council meeting.
Sorry, there's a significant echo.
Yes.
Is that better? Is that better? Okay. Sorry, I'll try to adhere as closely as I can. So it was the document I was referring to was the extract from the May 14th, 2020 council meeting. And Mr. Kahar had noted that the actual document found at tab 46 was incomplete. What we have provided to the parties and to the tribunal this morning, and Mr. Kahar also has hard copies that he'll hand up. What this is a clerk certified copy of the extracts from the May 14th, 2020 council meeting. And it's a two-page extract. The first page is the relevant extract from the open session council meeting, where council resolves to reconsider the decision made at the meeting the previous day on May the 13th. The second page is the relevant extract from the closed session council meeting. And the document speaks for itself, so I don't intend to go through it chapter and verse. But in general terms, you'll see that council directs staff to advise the LPAT that it supports the proposed modifications to the secondary plan, zoning bylaw, and Part 1 official plan, precisely in accordance with the staff report and without any further modifications. And I'd also draw to your attention the last item, G, where it provides that appropriate city staff and legal counsel be directed and authorized to disclose this resolution as may be required for purposes of any proceedings before the LPAT in relation to these appeals, provided that the confidentiality of any proceedings or deliberations of council in closed session is not thereby waived for any other purpose. And I would advise, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, this is precisely the same document which the city filed on the motion that was brought by Mr. Cherniak's client and adjudicated by Vice Chair McCooch on June the 16th, as reflected in his June 29th order. And just to confirm, Sir and Madam Chair, this document is being filed by the city pursuant to section 447.6 sub 1 of the Municipal Act. We can have copies of that available, but just for assistance, what that section provides, and I'll quote from it, a copy of any record under the control of the clerk of the municipality purporting to be certified by the clerk and under the seal of the municipality may be filed and used in any court or tribunal instead of the original, and is admissible in evidence without proof of the seal or of the signature or official character of the person signing it, unless the court or tribunal otherwise directs. So in our respectful submission, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, this should put an end to any issue with respect to what was in fact decided by the council on May 14th. It's admissible without any further proof of its authenticity. It is a certified and sealed document, and we would ask that this be filed as a separate exhibit with your permission. I think it would be appropriate. I'm in your hands, Mr. Chair. I think we can simply replace it with the version in the document book if that's the tribunal's.
Okay, so can we not put it as next number on the list?
That would be fine.
Yes, that's fine, and it would be at Exhibit 11.
Exhibit 11.
Thank you.
You said there was another housekeeping matter? I'm sorry.
Sorry, there is, Mr. Chair. Ms. Turney, who I believe is in the next room, had indicated that she wanted to file a copy of the minutes of settlement between the city and her client 10870 Yonge Street. I think yesterday this came up and Mr. Kahar had indicated that we had intended to include a copy of that document in the joint document book, but by inadvertence it was excluded from that document. So I think Ms. Turney's intention was to draw your attention and take you to it this morning.
Ms.
Yes,
Turney?
thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Burton. So I have left 2 copies of the minutes of settlement on the bench in front of you. Just, I guess it would be to your right. I have also, for convenience, left 2 copies of Mr. Folletta's witness statement, although I can also bring copies with me on the day that he is being examined. And as Mr. Kussner said, the intention was for the minutes of settlement to be in the joint document book, but through inadvertence, they were not included. I'm in your hands on whether they should be marked as a separate exhibit. I suspect they should, but we can also certainly do that when Mr. Folletta introduces them during his evidence. So that is my first of 2 points.
All right, why don't we make that then Exhibit 12?
I
Sorry?
see that's on as number 9 on the list already.
Madam Chair, that's right. We had allotted Exhibit 9 for that document. So
Let's leave it then. Let's leave it then. Also, could I just comment, please, everyone, just say Mr. Chair or Chair or whatever you call Mr. Colburn. You don't need to tack on Madam. I will ride on his coattails, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so thank you. Those will be then, I guess, marked as Exhibit 9. The second point, and I will be very brief, is that because of the limited role that our client will be playing for the next few days, I would ask the tribunal's permission for me to be dismissed at this time. Ms. Kabuli will continue to monitor the proceeding on our client's behalf. And with the tribunal's permission, I will check in from time to time as necessary. I will also be present for the examination of our witness.
I'm sorry, apparently the chair can't be heard, so that is fine with us. Please feel free to leave and we'll follow your procedure. Thanks.
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Anderson. Arising out of your evidence yesterday, is there anything that you would like to clarify?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Kahar. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. A few things from yesterday, just going back through my notes that I just want to bring forward for the members in terms of just some information. Firstly, I think yesterday when I was walking through the photo book and I was describing some of the quadrants, one of the areas I was describing was the southeast quadrant, and this is the quadrant within which the TSMJC lands are found. And I was referencing the location of the existing Bernard bus terminal, and that is at the southeast corner of that quadrant. And I looked back into my witness statement and it references the southwest quadrant. So that's at paragraph 18. I just want to make that correction for the record. And two other minor elements that address what I referred to as the active and pending development applications that are part of the KDA. I referenced the Doliola lands having 2 development applications, one of which is for the townhomes that is under construction and has certainly been fully approved. And the other is a second area closer to Yonge Street. And I referred to the concept for those lands. Those lands are actually part of an active development application, not appealed before this board, but certainly being processed by the city. I understand those applications date back originally to 2019, and they actually were recently resubmitted with the intent, as I think Mr. Kagan indicated, to conform and comply with the proposed modifications before you. And one final minor note, just to clarify, and this is in relation to the Yonge MCD lands, and those are in the northwest quadrant. There was a development application that was subject to a hearing at the LPAT, and I believe Ms. Foran referred to that as phase 1. That was for an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and a draft plan. And that matter has been settled, and that matter was within that South Brookside secondary plan, and I referenced the tertiary plan that had been created for those lands and how that boundary was adjusted. And so as a result of that settlement and the boundary adjustment in this process for the KDA secondary plan, you see the minor adjustment to the boundary for the KDA in that northwest corner.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. So I think the next area in your evidence you were intending to go to from yesterday was an overview of the instruments that are before the tribunal. So that's the secondary plan, part 1 OP, the implementing zoning bylaw. And then I think you're also going to address how those instruments are affected by the proposed modifications.
So what I'd like to do this morning is, as Mr. Kahar indicated, provide the members with an overview of the proposed modifications that are before you at a very high level, just indicating what they are, the structure of the plan as it's proposed, as well as the zoning bylaw, and just sort of highlight the key points and the changes that have occurred from the adopted plan in November of 2017 that was appealed to the plan that is before you as modified today. Before I do that, I did want to just highlight the context for those proposed modifications. And that certainly you'll hear that information in opinion evidence, but just to frame the structure of that plan and the bylaw, obviously at the hierarchy in terms of provincial policy, we have the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, and I think there's no dispute that these lands, the KDA lands, are within a settlement area, and certainly there are a number of policies in the provincial policy statement that address settlement areas and development within settlement areas. In terms of the growth plan, again, the lands are within a settlement area. They're also within the built-up area in terms of their location. They're also part of a strategic growth area, which in the growth plan can include major transit station areas and transit corridors, as well as urban growth centers. And so there are a number of policies in the growth plan that relate to strategic growth areas, specifically MTSAs and transit corridors that talk about minimum intensification targets and densities, as well as obviously growth forecasts. And also the bus rapid transit is recognized as a higher order transit. It's defined as that and also defined as an MTSA under the growth plan in terms of context. In terms of additional provincial policies, certainly the Greenbelt Plan, as it encompasses the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, includes the KDA, and within the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, you'll see that the KDA within the city of Richmond Hill is part of a settlement area. And while not a direct policy in terms of the growth plan or the PPS or the Greenbelt Plan, certainly Metrolinx's updated regional transportation plan as it relates to the 2041 horizon for planning transit in the Greater Toronto area is applicable to the KDA. And then in terms of the Region of York official plan, again, that plan recognizes the KDA within a settlement area and also recognizes Yonge Street of one of the key regional corridors. It also requires the lands to be identified, the KDA lands to be developed through a secondary plan process. And so if I could share the screen, I just wanted to highlight a few elements of, excuse me, the City of Richmond Hill official plan, just for reference. I'm just seeing if I am sharing my screen. Okay. Is that coming up? No, I will try that again. Good. I'll try and zoom out a little bit. So this is an extract from the city's official plan, and this is just to indicate, if you can see on the screen, Yonge Street, this is schedule from the plan, Schedule A3, that refers to the settlement areas. And you can see it also delineates the built boundary. And this is to indicate that the KDA area, if you follow along Yonge Street, just north of Elgin Mills Road, you'll see the location of the KDA sort of centralized where my pointer is, and that's the location of the KDA. And as you can see, it's well within the settlement area and the built boundary. And further, you'll note on the city's secondary plan area schedule, which is A10, you'll see the Richmond Hill Center here. I'm just going to, zoom out a little bit too far. You will see the KDA, which is referred to as the Yonge Street 16th Avenue KDA, just north of Richmond Hill Center. See the downtown local center, and then you can see the Yonge and Bernard KDA just north of Elgin Mills Road. And again, this is just for reference in the policy framework in terms of the secondary plan area of the City of Richmond Hill official plan.
Those extracts can be found at Exhibit 1C, Tab 8.
And I am just referencing here, I believe this is the urban structure schedule of the plan, and it really is replicating again the KDAs as well as showing the Richmond Hill Center as the urban growth center. And so if I move, very hard to navigate, but you can see the Yonge Bernard KDA in this location on the plan.
What schedule is that?
That's Schedule A1, urban structure. And again, on the land use plan, we see the KDA just north in this purple color that's referencing the key development area, which again is an intensification area. And you can see also on this plan that relates to land use, the various land use provisions that are provided along Yonge Street, and also the residential areas to the east and the west for context. And that's on Schedule A, 2. And also you'll note on this schedule, just for reference as well, that there is the natural core areas that are located, as we talked about yesterday, the German Mills Creek and also the tributary of the Rouge. And you can see those at those locations to the southwest and to the northeast. And I'm trying to go back to unshare my screen. There we go. So I'm hoping that provides the members just with that overview of the various levels of policy that apply provincially, regionally, and at the local level in terms of the development of the secondary plan and the proposed modifications that are before you. What I'd like to do to provide the members again with a very high level overview of the structure of the KDA plan and really just focus on some of the key changes between the plan that was developed and adopted in 2017 and then subsequently appealed and the plan that is before you today. And again, just providing some highlights of the structure, the various elements and policies and the changes that have occurred. So the plan itself is structured as many secondary plans are. It provides for an introduction and an overall purpose and vision and a set of principles to guide the more detailed policies. And those are found in section 12 of the secondary plan. And they include a purpose of the plan. And in that particular purpose, the one change that has occurred is a change to the reference of the population range to be accommodated within the plan. And we see that based on the increase to the FSI that is in the current plan, that range of people and jobs, employment opportunities has been increased from the November plan, which was 8,000 to 10,000 residents with approximately 1,200 to 2,000 jobs. That has now been increased to accommodate, and it's referenced in the initial purpose section, a range of 10,600 to 11,300 people and employment between 1,500 and 3,000 jobs. So that certainly is a change that's reflecting, again, the change to the policies that are permitting a higher overall FSI. And so the vision for the secondary plan, again, reflects reference to the parent OP and speaks about this area as a key development area, accommodating intensification. And it also speaks to the highest and highest densities being located along Yonge Street. And the majority of the policies within this section are very similar, in fact, almost identical to those that were provided in 2017, with one change, and that is actually the reference to the growth plan, which is now referenced as the 2019 growth plan as opposed to the previous 2017 plan. The plan also in this introductory section sets out principles, and these revolve around, and I believe I mentioned these in providing sort of an overview of the preferred approach in the original November plan. Excuse me. These speak about 3 key principles that are provided as a foundation for the plan, and they include improving connectivity with a series of objectives, accommodating transition with a series of objectives related to a transition of built form, height and density from the highest density areas to the neighborhoods, and creating local identity. And this speaks about a vibrant mixed use focus for the area. And those principles generally remain the same. There is some slight language modification that speaks to non-residential development in those principles. But overall, those three core principles of the plan remain the same. And then we move to a section of the plan that's referred to as the character areas. And these are areas of the plan that I also referred to as part of that original work that was done that talks about how the KDA is established in terms of distinct areas that will provide for certain FSI, certain policies, and that will provide for a mix of land uses in each of those areas. And in the current plan, those three areas are referred to as the corridor character area. And this is that area that is sort of the corridor along Yonge Street within the KDA. And then we have the interior character area and the neighborhood edge. And if I can just share my screen again, I'm going to bring up the schedules from the plan just to illustrate. I'm hoping this is visually those areas. And so this is schedule 1 from the plan, and you can see that the character areas as they're provided with the bright pink color, those are the corridor character areas along Yonge Street. You see the lighter sort of brownish color, those are the interior character areas. And then you'll see a lighter yellow, which provides some delineation along Yorkland Street to the east in this location. And you can see the neighborhood edge areas to the west on Abitibi and the extension of Abitibi, and then certainly on the Doliola lands that are under construction.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry, at what time did you say this particular map was established? From the beginning of the KDA, the amendment, or just recently? Has there been any change?
Yes, so the character area was established in the November 2017 plan. The change that has occurred is, in essence, the delineation on the different quadrants. So the corridor or the corridor character area is predominantly the same with a slight modification. The interior area to the east is predominantly the same. The main change that has taken place is, in essence, the changes to reflect the Doliola lands being developed with townhomes along that edge. The one other change I would note in the character areas is that the interior character areas also now refer to the inclusion of high-rise buildings as permitted. Going to pull. So within the character areas, there are a number of policies that then go on to identify the mix of uses and land uses that are permitted. The policies go on to speak about height. They also go on to speak about density, as well as built form. These policies also include references to community services and housing. So all of those policies are included in this section 12.2 that is intended to provide policies to support the intensification with policies that direct various forms of height and density, as well as built form. And so in terms of the policies that speak to the mix of uses, and those are found in section 12.2.1 of the plan. These policies generally speak to the requirements for uses within the different character areas. And the one change that has occurred talks about the importance, both plans continue to talk about the importance of maintaining and enhancing the area's existing retail and commercial function while evolving to provide for additional residential and employment uses. There are new policies that speak to at-grade frontages. And this is a policy, and it's actually found at Schedule 4 that's introduced. I'll just bring that up. And so this at-grade frontage policy is shown on Schedule 4. You'll see it says active at-grade street frontages. And this is a new policy in the section on mix of uses that is now requiring a minimum of 15% of active at-grade uses to be provided in redevelopment. And you can see from the schedule that this policy now applies to a number of areas along Yonge Street frontages, as well as Bernard, as well as the new proposed road that comes through the southeast quadrant.
Just a second. Does that mean there's a maximum front yard setback? Is that sort of the effect of that policy? Not sure I really understand it.
So in fact, the at-grade frontage policies are actually indicating, and this is again a change, it's encouraging that of all the gross floor area in the redevelopment along those locations, 15% of that total gross floor area be provided in non-residential uses. So those could be commercial or office to provide for active street frontages at those locations. And I would also note that the intention with the policy as it continues on is to provide that mix to be in a mixed use building, so integrated into a building at grade, but it can also be provided in standalone buildings as is set out in the policy. Could be in a single building. The other additional policy that has been provided in the mix of use policies, and this is actually implemented through the zoning bylaw. And this is a requirement now for non-residential uses that exist in particular quadrants to be maintained or increased with redevelopment. So somewhat of a different policy, but basically that policy is saying, and when I go through the bylaw, you'll see this, that there's a certain amount of gross floor area today that functions for various non-residential uses. And this policy implemented through the zoning requires redevelopment to incorporate that minimum amount that exists today, and again, in various forms. I'm jumping ahead. I'm just going to turn to the density schedule now. So in terms of height and density, this is certainly an area from the November plan to this plan that has changes. And in the height policies of the KDA, we now see policies that provide for a maximum height in those neighborhood edge areas, character areas that are defined, of 3 stories. And I think I'll go back to Schedule 1 here. You'll see on this schedule, sorry, to pull it up again, referencing those areas of neighborhood edge. So these neighborhood edge areas have a maximum height of 3 stories, whereas the interior and the corridor character areas have a minimum height of 4 stories. And the difference between the November plan and this plan is that the November plan actually had a schedule similar to density that allocated heights, as I mentioned before, with the ranges up to 15 stories in the corridor area, and then 4 to 10 stories in the interior area, 3 stories in the neighborhood area. That reference on the schedule to prescribed heights has been removed. The minimum 3-story height is consistent between the two plans, but the main change is that the prescribed heights in the previous plan have now been removed from the schedule.
For all
Yes.
3 areas.
With the exception, as I would say, of the neighborhood edge, that maintains the 3-story maximum in both plans. And now going to the density schedule. So this schedule, together with the policies, again, is identifying prescribed maximum density in each of the areas. And these policies also provide for, again, the overall maximum density of 4.0 FSI, and that applies to the whole plan. And for the whole plan, a minimum FSI of 2.5. And that certainly is a change from the November plan, which had the minimum overall at 2 and the maximum overall at 3. And the one other note in the density policies is that in order to ensure the minimum target for the major transit station area is achieved, and that's the 200 residents and jobs per hectare. The reference in the density policies now is that no development has to demonstrate on each development site that a minimum of 1.5 FSI is achieved. So that again is a new policy that's introduced. The policies continue to refer to the highest densities, again, along the Yonge Street corridor. And in a comparison between the two schedules, the Schedule 2 and the schedule from the November plan and this plan, you'll see that the previous November plan had the colors for the various character areas and prescribed densities. And this plan actually provides a breakdown of the densities as it applies to various sections within each of the quadrants, but very much following along generally the character area designations. So you can see from this plan, you have the 5.0 maximum FSI within the corridor designation, character designation, and then the 3.0 FSI following within the interior, and then the 1.0 FSI in the neighborhood edge area. In terms of the policies that continue in this section, that again give direction to mixed use, height, density, as I mentioned, there are a number of policies that address built form. There are policies also that in the November plan address community benefit provisions. And you'll note in the current plan that those have been removed. And there is a reference to them in the implementation section. And that reference is intended to apply that given the transition through Bill 108, the community benefits charge bylaw will effectively replace those Section 37 provisions. So that is one change between the two plans, again, to reflect the change to provincial policy. The built form policies that actually are set out in the plan speak to a number of policies and direction related to urban design and built form, specifically street orientation and street walls. And generally these policies are predominantly the same as they were in November, with a slight change that speaks about separation distances between mid-rise buildings, requiring that separation to apply to mid-rise buildings as well as tall buildings. And the angular plane and shadowing policies, again, predominantly the same, with one actual significant provision, and that is actually in the zoning bylaw. I believe you'll see the schedule that indicates the location of where, actually it's in the plan, an indication of where angular planes will be provided from. So it's showing you a map of where to measure the angular plane for clarification. But otherwise, in those built form sections, the policies generally remain intact. There are also policies in this section that go on to speak to community services. And those policies are speaking about the inclusion of community services and community uses throughout the plan, and that they're encouraged to be provided, integrated with redevelopment, and also co-located where possible. The policies related to housing speak to the importance of affordable housing and require a minimum of 35% of the units in the overall KDA to be affordable. And there's clarification that's in order to realize the city's and the region's affordable housing targets. And it goes on to speak about various policies related to affordable housing, including encouragement for rental housing as well. And those policies generally have remained the same. The next section in the plan deals with parks and urban open space throughout the KDA. And I'm just going to bring out the schedule for so in the November 2017 plan, there was a Schedule 3 open space plan. And in essence, the main change between the policies between the November plan and this plan is that this plan, the previous plan referred to urban squares, which were to be conveyed as part of the park system. The new plan now references urban plazas. And as you may be familiar with the reference to publicly accessible private open space, or POPs. And in essence, the new plan provides policies in incorporating these POPs or urban squares through the redevelopment of sites throughout the plan. And there are policies that speak to those types of urban plazas. And so you'll see on the schedule that these are not delineated. They're intended to be provided through the redevelopment process, whereas the previous plan identified the location of urban squares. The other change between the two schedules is a new linear park that's introduced. Again, there are policies for linear parks as well, and enhanced streetscapes. But the new linear park that's proposed on this schedule that was not provided in the November plan is the linear park that traverses the southeast quadrant. And you can see that located on the schedule. The one other change I would note just generally is that the plan identifies, in addition to the linear parks and the urban plazas and enhanced streetscapes, the greenway system. And while identified on the previous plan, the new plan has specific policies that now relate to the ability to look at reduced buffers for development to the greenway system through a study process. And those policies are now set out in the updated plan. So we've dealt with the general vision, purpose, principles for the plan. We've talked about the character areas and the land use, and then the policies that relate to height, density, and various elements within those character areas. The next section of the secondary plan deals with connectivity and mobility. And many of these policies and their direction are reflected in Schedule 4 to the plan, which I'm just bringing up now. And Schedule 4 refers to streets. And these policies cover a number of elements related to the transportation system. They speak to active transportation. And as you can see, the schedule provides for a network. And that's, as we, I think, spoke to yesterday, this idea of a public ring road system through the KDA. In addition to that, there are a number, as you can see, of just trying to pull this up a little bit here. You can see this plan as part of the active transportation system overlays the linear parks and the connections. It's also identifying the location of cycling facilities, indicating the location of signalized intersections and potential signalized intersections through the plan, and also identifying the existing Bernard bus terminal, as well as potential trails. You can see through this schedule and then through the policies that this is reflective of an overall transportation network to support the secondary plan and the proposed development within the plan.
Ms. Anderson, can you point out where the NEC lands would be on this schedule, the traffic signal that they have identified that is at issue, as well as any roads that are shown on their lands?
So the intersection locations that are shown are the existing intersection locations, which I'm just going to zoom up here. So these are the existing intersection locations. You can see that right at Yonge and Bernard. And I'm sorry if I'm going to lose this a little bit. Again, as a Mac user, I'm challenged here. But you can see the NEC lands generally in this location. So there's the existing intersection at Yonge and Bernard. There is also an all-way stop that's proposed along Bernard at this location, where the new road system would then come from the south and travel into those lands between the two parcels, and then continue to travel on to this new proposed signalized intersection, which is, I believe, the extension of the new road system. And that's located here, potential signalized intersection. You can see it at the north end of the NEC lands. And again, connecting into the road proposed from the west. So this is probably a section of the plan that has a number of changes that are proposed in terms of policies. Some of those relate to the, and I mentioned active transportation, transportation demand management, known as TDM, as well as policies related to public streets and private streets, access, encroachments, and parking. So all of these form part of this section of the plan, providing direction for the overall transportation network to support the KDA. And so certainly this change from the 2017 plan is updated to reflect the updated transportation network that's being proposed. But generally, the concept of the ring road system did apply in the November plan. But we see some additional revisions and changes with this updated network in the 2020 plan.
Excuse me just a sec. You mentioned continuation or a new road. Is that reflected in the sort of maroon color to the west of Yonge Street there?
That's correct. And the other change, of course, is as a result of the boundary of the KDA being amended. There's that reflective change now with the extension of Abitibi Street in this location here. The new plan, certainly in terms of the policies, updates policies as it relates to the new proposed Bernard bus terminal. And those policies are now found in the modified secondary plan. And there are additional policies, and they're quite detailed in relation to transportation demand management. And those are the requirements to be considered through redevelopment proposals through a transportation demand management study. One other element that is identified in the plan, and that is the issue of public and private streets and the idea of encroachment. And certainly the new policies refer to the stratification study that's being undertaken by the city that will address those issues further as development comes forward. And the last section of the plan that's found in all secondary plans and official plans is a section on implementation. So this is a reference to all of the tools and implementation policies that will assist in implementing the plan. And it has reference to the use of a community improvement plan to support the development. It also has policies related to monitoring of the plan, which is important to understand. Certainly in terms of development on an ongoing basis and monitoring that. It's set out in these particular policies how that will be undertaken. There's certainly policies on land acquisition, and these are generally similar to what they were in the November plan. Again, policies on servicing as well as site plan control. And probably the one change to the policy, which is now found in the plan, are the changes as they relate to the zoning bylaw. And the key change here is a policy that now provides for zoning bylaw that will be implemented with a holding provision. And there are, I would describe them as two aspects to the policies for the holding provision. One is the use of the holding provision to ensure that the development that comes forward in this area, given the level of intensification, is appropriately phased in coordination with infrastructure. And that would include capital projects that relate to the transportation network, and those are now listed in the plan. And it also speaks to the need to allow development to come forward based on certain thresholds that are associated with not only those transportation improvements, but also a modal split, which is trying to be increased and improved through this plan. So you'll see in this new plan a table that references those what I'll call thresholds. And in essence, it is saying that the holding provisions are put in place to ensure orderly development. And I'll speak to the holding provisions specifically in the bylaw, but certainly in these policies, it's indicating that through the holding provision in the zoning bylaw, these thresholds are in place. And once a development is close to approaching these thresholds, it can continue under these scenarios. So as an example, if a development is coming forward and it's very close to exceeding sort of the first threshold, which is 10,400 residents and jobs. So anything under that is not triggering any of the requirements for the regional, the capital projects to be completed or consideration of the modal split. But once you go above that 10,400, and depending on the capital project that's completed and or the modal split, you sort of get your check to have complied with the holding provision. And so that requires consideration by the city as well as the region in relation to both modal split and the transportation projects. And you'll hear more evidence on that, but just in relation to a policy, this policy is very similar to other secondary plans that introduce this idea of thresholds, and it's stating that the holding provisions will be used for that purpose. I should also note that there are a number of other requirements to be addressed through the holding provision, and I'll speak to those in a moment in relation to the zoning bylaw. But one of the other elements that I spoke to that is new in this plan is using the holding provision as a tool to ensure a mix of non-residential and residential development. So you'll see referenced in these policies the requirement for the minimum amount of non-residential GFA to be integrated into new development in accordance with the zoning bylaw requirements. So that's the second part sort of the holding provision policies.
Anderson, are you now going to be going into the bylaw?
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to give you some references as to where you can find the secondary plan with the proposed modifications. That's at volume 8 of the joint document book, Exhibit 1H, tab 33.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. It's at Exhibit 1H, tab 33. And the November 2017 secondary plan is available at Exhibit 1G, tab 26.
So, Mr. Chair, Madam Burton, I'm going to take you through an overview. Sorry, Ms. Burton. Mr. Chair, I'm going to take you through
Just members, okay?
force of habit.
A lot of people still say board. We accept it.
So I will now take you through an overview of the proposed zoning bylaw. And actually, before I do that, I should reference the proposed changes to the Part 1 official plan, which I neglected to mention. So in addition to the KDA secondary plan that I just walked through, there are proposed amendments to the Part 1 plan. And those are again found in the document book, as Mr. Kahar just referenced. And without going into detail, really the indication from these policies is it's reflecting what is being proposed in relation to the overall density. So the current Part 1 official plan policies relate to a maximum height for the KDA of 15 stories. And it also references an overall, actually it's deficient in referring to any kind of overall density for the Yonge and Bernard KDA. It's certainly now referencing that specific density range as being provided, and that's that minimum of 2.5 and 4 overall. So that's a new policy being added to the Part 1 plan to make reference to this secondary plan. and then the amendment to remove the 15-story maximum height. And the reference in the Part 1 plan now is providing for the application of site densities along with the various built form policies. So I apologize, that should have been the first thing I did with you, was just to reference those Part 1 policies. And there are some additional modifications, and I believe those are all found, again, to ensure the implementation of the plan. And those are found in the document book as well.
So just to assist the tribunal, the Part 1 OP is at tab 35 of Exhibit 1H. And the zoning bylaw with the proposed modifications that Ms. Anderson will be going to is at tab 27 of Exhibit 1G. Sorry, that should be tab 34 of Exhibit 1H, apologies. The previous zoning bylaw without the proposed modifications is at Exhibit 1G, tab 27.
Sorry, that's the previous plan.
Yes, the previous zoning bylaw, Exhibit 1G, tab 27, the bylaw with the modifications, Exhibit 1H, tab 34.
Right, thank you.
So the bylaw itself, many of the sections in the implementing bylaw are very similar and have not changed as they relate to the administration section of the bylaw, as well as many of the definitions. So I won't go through those, but the bylaw certainly contains administrative section. It also contains a series of general provisions that again are relatively the same as the implementing bylaw adopted in November. The one change that has occurred, and that is in relation to the actual zones. So you can see on the screen here that there is one zone that is applied to all of the KDA, and that's the KDA zone with a holding provision. You will note the star, which is in reference to 70 Bernard, and that is to identify that those lands have been brought in as an amendment to the zoning bylaw. So that zoning is in place. But the KDA zone now, as it's structured in the plan, is essentially identifying for the KDA itself. It's the mixed use zone, and it permits a range of uses. And the zoning bylaw provides a table that's identifying all of the various residential and non-residential uses that are permitted throughout the plan. And then, similar to most structures of the bylaw, you'll see a number of notations that are special provisions that relate to those particular uses. So one of the changes to the zoning bylaw in those notations is a reference to a new schedule that is Schedule E, and that is, as I mentioned before, the schedule that now, as through implementation, requires that non-residential uses, the minimum set out on the schedule, is provided with redevelopment. So if I can pull up that schedule. And you'll see on this particular schedule a reference in each of the quadrants to a number that relates to square meters. And this is referencing, again, minimum non-residential gross floor area that is required to be provided with redevelopment of uses within each of the quadrants. So this is a new schedule that was not in the previous bylaw, and it's specifically in reference to the notation for non-residential uses. So you'll see in the table a reference to the new Schedule E. And I would note that in addition to that requirement, There are also policies that flow from that in the general provisions that speak to existing uses and also in-term uses. And the indication in the bylaw as it's provided is that that particular regulation would not apply to the expansion or enlargement of existing uses which are permitted in the bylaw to occur. And there are specific provisions in the bylaw that refer to expansions and enlargements of existing uses and in-term uses. So in addition, there are, again, a number of general regulations that relate to the determination of things like the zone boundaries, and this actually speaks to implementing some of the policies, and that is where you have a parcel that traverses two boundaries, how each of the density provisions, how each of the FSI provisions as they're provided for will apply. So that is also set out in the zoning bylaw. Just going to turn to the schedule in the bylaw that also refers to the prescribed density. And again, this is implementing the official plan. And this is illustrating reflective of those areas where there is a maximum FSI for those particular lands. And again, the difference between this bylaw and the November bylaw is that this bylaw is now providing for the 3 FSI to 5 as the maximum in the particular character areas, as opposed to the previous plan, which had the 2.5 to 4. The bylaw also continues to reference height and the maximum and minimum heights, but that is the main change, again, similar to the secondary plan, whereby height is now provided in terms of a minimum height in the neighborhood edge areas that you can see hatched along the edge locations, and a minimum height in the corridor and the interior areas of 4 stories. And so this is a very different schedule than the November schedule, which had the prescribed heights in those ranges, 10 to 15, and then the 4 to 10 in the interior areas. So a different schedule now to implement the heights as they're provided for in the policies. And one final additional change to the bylaw, as I mentioned earlier, is the inclusion of a reference for angular plane. And the intention of this schedule is to give clarity as to the locations from where angular plane is to be measured. And you can see along these neighborhood edge areas, there's a dotted line that is indicated to be the location from where the angular plane is to be measured to determine appropriate transition of height. And again, many of the provisions as they relate to open space, which is again one of the zones on the land use schedule, there are no changes. There are some additional standards that have been incorporated into, again, the zoning schedule as it relates to different uses, as I mentioned before. Most of the general provisions remain the same, with very little, if any, change at all. There are changes to the parking standards. So those again are found in the general provisions. And those result in reduced minimum and maximum parking standards for different types of units. And the one other change to the bylaw is the introduction of the holding provisions. And again, those holding provisions provide for a number of conditions that have to be met. And again, these do not apply, as should mention, to, again, those expansions or enlargements of existing uses or interim development. But the holding provisions for new redevelopment generally identify a number of requirements, including the achievement of the minimum non-residential GFA. And they also require a functional servicing study report to be completed, as well as a transportation study. And those are the provisions that are set out in the new bylaw. And so, Mr. Chair, that's an overview of the modified bylaw that's before you, just in terms of a general area of change, as well as how the bylaw is structured. And an overview of the secondary plan as it's now structured and before you with the proposed modifications, as well as the modifications to the Part 1 plan. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Nothing further. Thank you.
I didn't get to the other room. Is that it?
Sorry.
Any small questions of clarification?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that, sorry, there's an echo. I just wanted to point out that in the hearing plan that we prepared, it contemplated that in the event any party did have any cross-examination questions for Ms. Anderson, that those would be deferred until the end of her main opinion evidence. Yeah.
I think that's why the chair said clarification.
Thank you so much.
I think Mr. Streisfeld may have a question or comment.
I just had a few questions related to some clarification. I don't know how far, I don't believe this is cross. I don't believe anything that I'm going to be asking is contentious.
Everything was going to be put over until her opinion evidence was given, and then you could do the both at the same time, or?
That was certainly our expectation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So we move on to transportation now. Do you want to take just 15 minutes? Is that going to?
No, that would be very helpful.
I think they have to clean this too and set it up.